Well, the days are going by, and the evidence that the Waukesha, uh, well, I guess what's a neutral term, tragedy is was an accident and not a massacre, has failed to materialize. At first, I was willing to give the authorities the benefit of the doubt and honestly, looking at the video, um, it did look like he swerved out of the way of some people. So, it could have been that this was just a bad situation, and for some reason the guy was driving full speed, and he avoided people where he could, and he hit people where he had to for whatever reason. I don't know the reason. Initially, there was some leak out of the police department that he was fleeing a knife fight. But why he would flee a knife fight into a parade was not at the time clear or obvious, and it has not become clear in the time since. And so it's very hard for me to still take that narrative seriously when evidence is piling up in the other direction, which suggests that this was clearly intentional and that this was a terrorist attack, perhaps a retaliation for the Rittenhouse verdict, which of course occurred in Kenosha, not too far away from Waukesha. Apparently, this guy was not driving at full speed for the entire time that he was on that drive. From what we know now, and again, this is still a fluid situation, and they're not doing a whole lot to give us all the details, which is an interesting sign in and of itself that you should question the official media narrative on this because we're getting so few details. But something that we're hearing now is that this guy was not driving super fast at first when the police who set up the barricades for the parade route, to keep drivers from driving into the parade. At first, this guy was driving slow, and they knocked on his window and told him to stop or whatever, and he didn't stop, and so he sped off, which seems to be a pretty deliberate act. Apparently, he had to make a hard left turn to get onto the parade route. And I've looked at a map of downtown Waukesha, Wisconsin. They're gridded streets. It's not like there's only a few roads because this is some commercialized suburban street plan where there's like 5 roads in the entire town, and so if they block off one of them, you're kind of screwed if you really need to get through there. And it would, even though it would still be insane, it would at least be plausible that somebody would be crazy enough to say, oh, well, I really got to get through here, so I'm just going to mow down all of the people at the parade. No, he could have just gone one street over and completely missed all the people in the parade. One block over. It's a normal American city grid. And so at this point, it's ridiculous to assume that this guy did it on purpose. Now, or I'm sorry, to assume that this guy did not do it on purpose. Now, considering that, or if we take for granted that that is the more plausible thing, that this was an intentional act, again, it feels silly that I even have to, couch it in those terms. What could have possibly motivated this guy? Now, for one thing, you could say, well, maybe he was just high on something and took some really bad drugs, and or maybe the DMT elves told him to do it. I guess that's possible. But considering that this guy was out on bail for running somebody over with his car, this seems, does 2 make a pattern? I don't know, do you count it as 2 or do you count it as 7, considering there are 6 dead bodies from this, and then the one woman, actually, he ran over a lot more people than that. So it's a pretty big pattern of him running people over with his car. Was he, was he on some really weird drugs when he ran over that woman before? Or is this somebody who is a violent individual whose weapon of choice is his red Ford Escape? So back to his motivations. I think we've got his MO down. His social media posts are, how should I put this? they don't leave a whole lot up to the imagination. The guy, I mean, if I met the guy on the street, would I have a big problem with him? No. Well, actually, what am I saying? If I met this guy on the street, he'd probably be acting deranged. But I mean, based on his social media posts alone, am I going to say that he is, irredeemable, terrible human being? No. He posted a lot of anti-white hatred. He posted stuff that seemed to indicate he's believes in the Black Israelite cause, something to the effect of, we're the real Hebrews. And mostly I just laugh those kinds of people off because I think that Black Israelites are funny. And they, of course, birthed that great meme, Das Right. I love the Das Right guy. And to be honest, you know, if I had a problem, if my litmus test for determining if if somebody was a bad person I didn't want to associate with was whether or not they posted anti-white hatred on their social media accounts, there wouldn't be a whole lot of black people that I could associate with. I mean, it's just a fact. It's much more tolerated for black people to say virulently anti-white things, and white people know they can't say bad things about black people publicly. Certainly not on social media. So you have to be somewhat numb to that. You can't just say, based on his social media posts alone, hey, this guy clearly has a deep-seated hatred for white people. Therefore, he's going to go probably commit mass slaughter against them. That's not the case. There's way too many black people in America with a deep-seated hatred towards white people. If you look at them all as people who are going to commit a terrorist attack against white folks at some point, it's just you'd be running yourself crazy. There's way too many of them to try and pay attention to. But given that this guy clearly was not a fan of the white folks, and that he bought into some of the more fringe black ideologies like black Hebrew Israelites and general black nationalism. I don't know if there was like Nation of Islam stuff on his feed. I can't remember. But when you couple all that with the fact that he just went and drove his car through a crowd of people and killed 7 white folks, including children, you got to say, hey, there might be a connection here. There's probably a connection here. Just earlier this year, I believe it was, the Capitol in D.C. There was a terrorist attack at the Capitol. You could say a mini insurrection in which a black nationalist got out of his car and started shooting at the cops, at the Capitol Police. Shot people. I'm sure you've probably never heard of this story. I talked about it on this channel, but it was news for that day, and then it wasn't news anymore. And this is not going to be news for very long either. I think it was off of CNN's front page in 2 days. Now, I know I'm jumping around a bunch here. I'm terrible. I probably should have wrote down some sort of notes for this, but I never write down notes. I always just sort of speak off the top of my head. And something that I keep thinking about and forgetting to get to is that this guy is from Milwaukee, okay? And he went to the Waukesha Christmas Parade, which is, I think, like 25 minutes away from Milwaukee, somewhere around there. It's a suburb of Milwaukee. That's what Waukesha was, or is. And he mowed down a bunch of white folks. Now, Waukesha itself, if you wanted to kill a bunch of white folks and send a message to white people, Waukesha is a good place to do it because it's a very white place. It is sort of a poster child of whiteness in America, as the left would think about it. You got a city like Milwaukee, which of course used to be mixed race. There used to be a lot of white people there. And then what happened was, as Milwaukee declined, the white folks moved out. They went to places like Waukesha, and the black folks were left behind in Milwaukee. And so you got this guy, Darrell Brooks. He's in Milwaukee, not a nice place to be. And he's mad at the white folks, and so you know what he does? He drives himself out to Waukesha to exact some revenge. That Rittenhouse kid, he got off scot-free. White folks always get off. They never, they never have to face consequences. So you know what? I'm gonna make him face some consequences. And in the immediate aftermath of this, there were a lot of people on Twitter who shared that sentiment. That was their gut reaction. A bunch of white folks get run over in Waukesha, a Republican in white town. Oh, you had it coming. There you go. Oh, this driver was just clearly defending himself. It was self-defense, clearly, mockingly saying that. And then you had, I think, seriously, you had a county chairwoman of a Democratic county chair in Illinois, which is nearby, say that this was karma for the Rittenhouse verdict. And so you got a lot of people who think this way. And so is it really such a stretch that this guy, with this, with the social media post that he made, commits a crime of this nature at this time after the Rittenhouse verdict? Is it really a stretch to think that, gee, this guy wanted to go out and mow down a bunch of white folks? Or is the stretch that this guy was just trying to flee the scene of another crime, and this was his only way out? This was the best way to escape, was by mowing down 40 people in the middle of an otherwise, in a grid of empty streets. He chose to pick one that was packed with parade marchers. And to top it all off, I think that the greatest evidence that this is what we're thinking it is, and it's not what the media wanted you to think it is that the media stopped talking about it. Very quickly. They swept this under the rug. It's old news. It's gone. Nobody's talking about it. That right there shows you that this is not a good story for them. It's not something that they want to shine a light on because it makes them look bad. It becomes very difficult for the media and academia and politicians to continue to promote virulent anti-white hatred in the wake of an anti-white terrorist attack perpetrated by someone who was clearly radicalized by the anti-white ideology. Leftists love to talk about how, or I shouldn't say leftists, the wokeists love to talk about how we need to end whiteness. Well, Darrell Brooks did his part to try and end whiteness. He ended the whiteness of 7 human beings and destroyed 7 families. And the media and the police and the mayor of this town, they don't even have the respect for the dead to acknowledge why they were killed. The police, the disgusting police, who should be defunded, who should be abolished, something that I agree with the leftists on, they said, oh no, we were ruling out terrorism. We don't know what the cause of this tragedy was. We don't know why these people died. We don't know why this guy ran them over. But it definitely was not terrorism. That we will tell you. Just so the media can then run with the headline, not terrorism, fleeing knife fight, no story here. Let's move on to go back to talking about Donald Trump's new spray tan. And if we needed any more evidence of the media's depravity, I think that you should look no further than this case, because this is not just the media, regurgitating Howard Zinn talking points and feeling a bunch of white guilt and saying, gee, Columbus, he was a net negative for humanity, and he treated the Indians poorly, and I feel bad about that. And so, you white people should feel ashamed. There's a big stretch from that kind of anti-whiteness, as the wokeists would say, and the kind of anti-whiteness to where you're completely desensitized to children being murdered by an anti-white activist. I mean, this is a quiet endorsement of it. The fact that CNN, or no, it was MSNBC, called this an accident, that CNN doesn't want to talk about it 2 days later, that they refuse to acknowledge what the likely cause of this was. Obviously, it goes without saying, if this guy ran over people at a Christmas parade in a black town, and he had a bunch of white nationalist Facebook posts. Of course, if he had white nationalist Facebook posts, he would be banned from Facebook. But leaving that aside, if he had a big white nationalist social media footprint, everyone would acknowledge, yeah, there's a 90% chance that this was a anti-black terrorist attack. But to me, the fact that they're not willing to acknowledge that, because here's the thing, even if you're someone who thinks, hey, Columbus is a bad guy, I think that white people throughout history done a bunch of bad things. You can think that and still value the human lives of children who are alive today, who haven't done anything wrong. That is, unless you think that the fact that they were born white is their original sin, and that they deserve to die. Then, you might not want to say that out loud yet, but you don't want to admonish a anti-white terrorist, because deep down, you agree with what he did. You don't think it's such a bad thing that those kids are dead, that those old ladies are dead. And so as far as I'm concerned, this is one of the most sick and depraved things the media has ever done, is try and cover this up. This isn't like covering up the Vegas shooting, which we don't really understand why they covered that up. It's an interesting story. It's suspicious. It's a great rabbit hole to go dive down. But it wasn't cut and dry like this is. Because here's the thing. They would have to acknowledge their role in this, and the fact that this man was espousing their ideology, and that he was acting really in their name. And if these folks really cared about the humanity of the dead, they would want to correct course. They would say, no, sure, when we say end whiteness, we don't mean murder white people. That's not what we want to do. That's not what we're about. But they're not saying that. They don't want to dial back the hatred. They don't want to try and rein in people like Darrell Brooks, who might be on the edge. I mean, to me, you've got people who are on the edge in society mentally, and who this kind of rhetoric can push over the edge, like I think is probably what happened with Darrell Brooks. The guy's not a great guy to begin with. But he probably was whipped up into enough of a frenzy by all this stuff that it pushed him into action. So I'm going to try and find out more about this case. I'm going to try and follow this, since it will not be covered by most media. Although hopefully the alternative media will cover this en masse. But I at least will try and do my part and talk about this if nobody else will. Because mainly that's why I started this channel, was so I could vent about topics that I did not hear other people talking about. That would frustrate me. Things like, the Yemen war, which I should talk more about. Or the Afghanistan negotiations, which, that's all over now. But nobody talked about that until right up in the time that the pullout occurred. Whereas I was talking about it the whole time through the negotiation process. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.